My stepmother physically attacks me because my father lies to her about why I don't want her to see my son, but lies between them are common because her pregnancy is by another man. Hello Reddit. I need your opinion on a complicated family situation. For context, I'm 25 years old and my father is 60. He has been dating my stepmother, Heather, who is 36, for 5 years. I also have a 19-year-old sister who still lives with them. It all started about 2 years ago when my cousin announced she was pregnant. Heather complained, saying it wasn't a big deal, and that a baby wasn't something so important. But the worst came on the day of my cousin's baby shower. It was a party at her house, and Heather told my father she felt unwell and needed him to stay to take care of her. However, that same night she miraculously recovered and went out drinking with her friends at a nearby bar. The strange thing was that, a few days later, Heather started showing excessive interest in my cousin's baby. So much so that my cousin began to feel uncomfortable with her attitude. At a family party, where both my cousin and Heather were present, my stepmother held the baby all night and seemed unwilling to let go. It wasn't until my cousin told me she needed to change and feed him that she released him. Although not without first saying that she could change and feed him, which was very odd because it's a baby that still breastfeeds. Earlier this year, my husband, 27, and I announced we were expecting a baby. My father was excited, as it would be his first grandchild. But according to my sister, Heather continued to be condescending, even more than before. Whenever I talked about anything related to my pregnancy, Heather reacted with phrases that minimized the importance of everything. When I mentioned the first kicks, her words were, "That must be annoying. I don't understand why people get so excited about that." When I showed the ultrasound images, her words were, "It's just a blurry spot. I don't know how you can see anything there." When I talked about the changes in my body, her words were, "Well, I hope you can get back to your figure afterward. It would be a shame if you stayed like that." At first, I didn't care because she was just my father's girlfriend and her opinion didn't affect me. But soon I noticed that my father was also starting to lose interest. He stopped asking for updates about my pregnancy and seemed distant whenever I tried to share something. The last straw was when my father didn't attend the baby shower, where we were going to reveal the name. It was a co-ed party, so men were also invited. His excuse was that Heather thought it wasn't worth going to an event like that. He could have attended for a few hours or at least for a while to know what his grandson's name would be, but instead he decided to miss it to do who knows what. I don't even know if he ever found out what his grandson's name was. Even one day I felt discomfort and had to go to the hospital. Luckily it wasn't anything serious, but I had to spend a night there. I told my father what was happening, but instead of coming to visit me and see if I was okay, he told me to call him if anything important happened, as he had a dinner reservation with Heather. It seemed a bit odd to me that he knew his daughter was in the hospital and there could be a complication with his grandson, but he still cared more about a dinner. However, that's how it had been for the last few months, so we stopped informing him about anything happening with the pregnancy. A month ago I finally gave birth. After 9 months of disinterest, my husband and I decided not to invite my father and Heather to the hospital. I spent 4 days hospitalized and neither of them bothered to visit us, while close friends and other family members did. My sister came to see us, so I know my father was aware of what was happening. When I left the hospital, I posted a photo of my baby on Instagram. To my surprise, my father called me furious because Heather had seen the photo. He accused me of being a bad daughter for hiding the birth of his grandson from him. He asked why I hadn't told them the baby had been born. I didn't lie to him. I told him that they hadn't been involved physically or emotionally during my pregnancy, so they found out the news like everyone else, through social media. Although I know perfectly well that my father already knew through my sister. Now, both my father and Heather are furious. They accuse me of using my son as a pawn just because I don't like Heather, and because they missed a few silly parties, in their words. On the other hand, my husband and the rest of my family say I haven't done anything wrong. My sister confirms that our father knew about the news but was waiting for me to tell him personally. Honestly, I don't think I've done anything wrong. My father was never present during my pregnancy in any way, and I feel the blame is primarily on Heather, although I don't understand exactly why she acts this way. Still, I need to know. Am I the bad one for not directly informing my father that I had my baby, and letting him find out in quotes through social media? Edit. Some people have asked if Heather has children or has ever been pregnant, and the answer is no. Update 1. It's good to know that I haven't been the bad one in all of this, and that my father and Heather are the ones with strange behavior, especially Heather. Many of you suggested that Heather might be jealous of the attention pregnant women receive because she's a narcissist and wants to be the center of attention, but honestly I don't think it's just that. Her behavior has been much more complex and frankly disturbing. As some may remember, Heather showed an unusual interest in my cousin's baby after its birth, despite having been quite dismissive during the pregnancy. Well, it seems history is repeating itself with me, but in an even more intense way. It all started a few days ago when Heather showed up unannounced at my house, saying she wanted to meet the baby. Normally, I wouldn't have a problem introducing her to my son, but that day wasn't the right time. The baby had hardly slept all night, and neither had I. I had spent hours trying to get him to sleep without success. Finally, in the morning, I managed to get him to sleep and was hoping to get some rest myself. I explained the situation to Heather and politely asked if we could schedule the visit for another day. But she didn't want to leave. She insisted that since she had made the trip there, which, by the way, is only 15 minutes, the least I could do was let her see the baby. I found it incredibly selfish on her part. If she cared so much, why didn't she call before coming? Why show up suddenly in the middle of the morning? Finally, after much insistence on my part, Heather left, but not without throwing a comment at me that left me furious. She said, "You shouldn't complain that your father and I aren't part of the baby's life if you don't show interest in at least letting us meet him." That made my blood boil because until now it had been quite the opposite. To help you understand better, I'll tell you about an incident that occurred during my pregnancy, shortly after my brief hospitalization for those discomforts I mentioned in my previous post. We were at a relative's house, and I needed to sit in a comfortable seat due to my condition. However, Heather refused to give up the only suitable chair, claiming she had been walking all day and was tired. The only available seats were uncomfortable bar stools, totally unsuitable for a pregnant woman who had just left the hospital. I remember my aunt intervened, kindly asking Heather to give me the seat. Heather's response was, "Being pregnant is not a disability. I'm tired too." My father, who was present, said nothing to defend me. It was my aunt who finally gave up her own seat and remained standing for the rest of the afternoon. Back to the present, after Heather left my house that day, I received a call from my father. Instead of asking how the baby and I were doing, or showing any interest in meeting his grandson, he criticized me for not letting Heather see the baby. He accused me of being selfish and trying to keep them away from my son's life. The irony is that until now, he hasn't shown any real interest in visiting us or being part of his grandson's life either. 2 days after this incident, my sister came to visit us. She brought some adorable gifts for the baby: a onesie with dinosaur designs, a soft rattle, and a baby storybook. She spent some time playing with the baby and helping me put him down for his nap. It was comforting to have someone from the family who really cared about us. After the baby fell asleep, my sister and I had a long conversation. She's not a big fan of Heather either, although she tolerates her because she's our father's girlfriend and wants to maintain harmony at home. However, what she told me left me thinking. According to my sister, she believes she knows why Heather behaves in such an erratic way. Apparently, she has overheard several arguments between our father and Heather. My sister thinks that Heather wants to have a baby of her own, and that's why she feels jealous of pregnant women. She's bothered by all the attention they receive during pregnancy. However, once the babies are born, it seems that a strong maternal instinct awakens in her, which would explain her sudden obsessive interest in newborns. What complicates the situation even more is that our father, at 60 years old, doesn't want to have more children. That's why he's been distant during the pregnancy and now doesn't want to meet the baby either. He doesn't want Heather to start thinking about it again. Although calling me to scold me because I haven't let Heather see him seems contradictory. All of this has left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, if what my sister says is true, I can understand Heather's behavior a little better, although I don't approve of it. It must be difficult for her to see other women living what she so desperately desires. But on the other hand, that doesn't justify her hurtful and selfish attitude towards me during my pregnancy, nor her attempt to force a relationship with my baby now that he's born. And as for my father, I feel deeply disappointed. I understand that he's in a complicated situation with Heather, but how can he allow that to affect his relationship with his daughter and grandson? Is it fair that my baby and I pay the price for his relationship problems? Perhaps dating a woman much younger than him is the problem, not my pregnancy or my child. Especially if they want very different things and my father is not willing to give them to her. I've been thinking a lot about how to handle this situation from here on out. Part of me wants to keep Heather, and by extension my father, away from my child. I fear that their erratic behavior could negatively affect my baby in the future. But another part of me wonders if I should try to have a frank conversation with my father, explain how I felt, and see if we can find a way forward that's healthy for everyone. As for Heather, honestly, I don't know what to do. Should I try to talk to her about what my sister told me? Or would it be better to keep my distance and establish clear boundaries about her interaction with my child? I feel emotionally exhausted. Between caring for a newborn and dealing with all this family drama, I barely have time to process my own feelings. My husband has been a great support, but I know he's also frustrated with the whole situation. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since my last update, but something has happened that I need to tell you about, so I'm back. Finally, my father decided to visit me and his grandson. I thought it would be a moment of reconciliation, but it ended up being a confrontation that may have irreparably damaged our relationship. When my father arrived, he seemed tense. First, I tried to keep things cordial. I introduced him to his grandson, and for a moment I saw a flash of emotion in his eyes. However, that spark quickly faded when we started talking. My father began by reproaching me for keeping him away from his grandson for so long. That surprised me and honestly it bothered me. I replied, "Dad, I haven't kept you away. You know perfectly well where I live. If you wanted to see your grandson, you just had to come or call." Then I decided to address the elephant in the room. I asked him why he hadn't shown interest in my pregnancy all this time. His response was, "Look, honey," he began, running a hand through his gray hair. "Heather has always wanted a baby, but I'm too old to be a father again. We've been arguing about this for a long time, and it's just easier to stay away." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad," I said, trying to stay calm, "we're talking about your grandson and your daughter. If you have a problem with your girlfriend, you should work it out with her, not abandon your family over something like this." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I continued, "It's normal for Heather to want to have a child. Many women her age do. But if you don't want to give her one, then maybe you should step aside and let her be with someone who does want to have children." Luckily, my husband had taken the baby to another room so we could talk privately. However, as the conversation became more heated, our voices rose so much that the baby started crying in the distance. My father became defensive. "You have no right to comment on my relationship with Heather," he said. "It's not an opinion, Dad. It's advice," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Well, keep your advice to yourself." "I don't need it," my dad said. The conversation was quickly getting out of control. My father, visibly upset, accused me. "You should get over your jealousy of Heather." That was the last straw. "Jealous? I'm not jealous, Dad. I just expected you to act like a father, and not like a man who only wants to be with a younger woman for sex." I saw my father's face turn red with anger. "How dare you talk to me like that? I've been a good father. I've worked hard all my life to give you everything you needed." "Yes, you've been a good provider," I admitted. "But being a father is more than that. It's about being present. It's about supporting your children in the important moments of their lives. Where were you during my pregnancy? Where were you when your grandson was born?" "I was giving you space," he weakly defended. "No, Dad. You were avoiding your problems with Heather at the expense of your relationship with me and your grandson." The argument continued for a while longer, becoming increasingly tense. My father accused me of being ungrateful, of not understanding how complicated adult life is. I replied that I understood perfectly, but that didn't justify his absence. Finally, my father stood up, clearly furious. "If that's what you think of me, maybe it's better that I'm not in your life if Heather bothers you so much." Those words hurt me, but I didn't back down. "The problem isn't Heather, Dad. It's you. You're the one who prefers to leave your daughter aside just because you can't work things out with your girlfriend." My father looked at me for a long moment, as if he was seeing a stranger. Then, without saying another word, he turned around and left, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking with a mixture of anger and sadness. My husband came running with the baby in his arms, worried about the shouting he had heard. I told him what had happened as tears began to fall down my cheeks. Several days have passed since then, and I'm still processing everything that happened. On one hand, I feel liberated for having finally said what I thought. My husband has been a great support. He reminds me that I did the right thing by defending my feelings and our son's interests. My sister has also called to tell me she supports me, although she's worried about how this will affect the family dynamics. I haven't heard anything from Heather since my father's visit. Part of me wonders if she knows what happened, and if so, how she's handling it. Will she keep insisting on seeing my child? As for my father, I don't know what to expect. The idea of my son growing up without knowing his grandfather saddens me, but at the same time, I can't allow the toxicity of this situation to affect my family. The good thing about all this is that Heather hasn't shown up. And although I understand what's going on, it doesn't justify her behavior all this time. Although I think the worst one here is my father, since he is precisely that, my father. I think he's being petty in all this just for a reason that doesn't justify it. I'm not saying he has to be the best grandfather in the world and be available 24 hours a day for his grandson, but abandoning me just to not make his girlfriend feel bad for something that's his fault, and then coming back to reproach me for things, it's not fair. I don't know what you think in the comments, but at least for me it seems that he's being irrational here. Update 3. I'm back again with an update that isn't the happiest to share, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's been almost 3 weeks since I last spoke with my father, and I haven't heard anything from him because he hasn't called or visited again. In part, I was okay with that because, as many said in the comments, he was the one acting badly, and until he resolved his own problems, it was best that he stayed away. I don't know what he's been doing about that, but I think it's best that he stays away. However, the update isn't about that. I just wanted to give a brief introduction to tell you something more about the previous post. The update is about Heather, as she has returned to my house and things have become most unpleasant. Again, she showed up at home without calling first, which I don't think is much to ask, because I recently gave birth, and it's not like I'm in the mood or have the energy to receive visitors all the time. She could have at least called to ask if my son was here, since when she came, he had gone with my husband to my in-laws' house to spend some time there. Also to give me a little break from being a mother for a few hours, since I love my son, but I guess he's not one of those who likes to sleep too much. Anyway, they had been gone for about an hour, and I only remember resting my head on the pillow and passing out from exhaustion. I woke up because someone was frantically knocking on the door. When I went to open it and saw it was her, I told her I was sleeping, but she didn't care and started yelling at me. She said she had been standing at the door for 10 minutes, and that it was rude of me not to open. I told her I was taking a nap and had just woken up from the noise. She replied that it wasn't necessary to make up excuses, that she knew very well that I didn't want her to see my son. She also told me that she had spoken with my father, who had told her everything about how I hated her and didn't want her around. According to her, my father had advised her to stay away from me because I was jealous of her and didn't want her around. Despite being just awake and poorly slept, I understood that everything she was saying was lies from my father to keep Heather away from me, just because it was convenient for him. I told her that none of that was true, that at no point had I said anything like that. I only mentioned that if they had a problem between them, it was best to resolve it on their own and stop putting me in the middle of all this drama. But Heather didn't care. She said she was there to talk things over and clear up the matter, because she didn't want to have a bad relationship with me, and wanted to meet the baby. I told her there was nothing to talk about and that I was tired of being put in the middle of their relationship, when it's something I didn't ask for, that they should sort out their issues first instead of blaming me for everything. Heather didn't care anyway, because she kept insisting on meeting my son and wanted to enter the house, despite me blocking her way. I told her my son wasn't there, and I repeated that she could have called before coming uninvited. It's not that I would have told her she could come, but we would have saved ourselves a lot of trouble. I also told her that before calling she should talk to my father, like the adults they are. She didn't like that comment and tried to enter by force, pushing me. She went to the room where my son was and seeing he wasn't there, came back and asked me where he was. By then I was already calling 911 and talking to the operator. Heather tried to take the phone out of my hand when she realized who I was talking to, but I had already given some information to the police. I told her it would be better if she left because the police were on their way, but she kept insisting that I tell her where my son was. She said I couldn't hide him forever, and that sooner or later she was going to be able to meet him. In the end, the police arrived and took her away, but she kept telling the police that I was hiding my son from her, which was strange, so the police officers looked at each other with confused faces, as well as looking at me. Finally, I filed a complaint for assault, which I think Heather deserved. However, if you ask me, I would have preferred to take my nap because I was really tired, and I ended up all that afternoon talking to the police and stressed, unable to sleep because of what had happened. Not even when everyone left because my mind was racing at that moment and it was impossible to go back to sleep. Then my husband arrived and said he was sorry he wasn't there. But I told him it wasn't his fault, but my father's and his inability to have a relationship with someone decent. That's what has happened, and the truth is that I'm more and more worried. It's no longer about comments or other things, but about an unbalanced person and a father who is making the situation even worse. Now, at least we have enough reasons to think about a restraining order against Heather, but I would have preferred my father to handle things better. Date 4. Before I begin my update, I want to respond to someone who has said that everything is my fault for not having acted sooner. I wonder what should I have done? It's not as if the situation where she wouldn't give me the seat, or missing the baby shower, were enough for a restraining order. Not even her previous visit was. We also haven't had a very close relationship in these last few months, because my father and Heather have distanced themselves from us, and we from them. Our connection in recent times has only been through encounters at family gatherings. What was I supposed to do? Put a moat around my house and buy dragons to fly around it? But returning to what's important. My husband spoke with my father on the phone, since I blocked him after the last incident. My father told him he was disappointed that I had called the police, just because Heather wanted to talk to me and fix things. My husband, who knows the whole story, replied that that's not what happened, and that Heather physically attacked me. My father insisted that was a lie, that Heather had told him it wasn't like that. Here's the problem. They both lie and they both believe in their lies. But when someone tells them what's really happening, they prefer to keep believing the other's version. Heather lied to him about what happened at home the other day, and my father has lied to Heather about the real reason why she can't see my children, and I'm in the middle because they're incapable of solving their own problems. Finally, my husband told him not to call again and hung up. We're working on the restraining order, and my father won't see his grandson again, just like Heather. Update 5. I think that, after several months without news, things have been resolved for me, as my father and Heather have stopped bothering me. In recent times I haven't received any more visits or calls, and everything has been very quiet. But the news, according to my sister, is that Heather is pregnant. You might think that things were resolved because my father decided to give Heather what she wanted, but you'd be wrong. The child isn't my father's, as Heather is pregnant by another man. It's not that I'm defending her, because she's been unfaithful and that's despicable, but I don't blame her if my father didn't want to have a child and she did. Instead of separating and each going their own way, they've remained in this toxic relationship. So I'm not surprised by everything that has happened. Could they have resolved this in a much easier way? Yes, of course. But they're both very toxic people and I feel sorry for that baby and for the father. Although, well, not so much for the father if he was with a woman who was already in a relationship. Anyway, my sister told me that they've separated, and the only good thing about all of this is that they weren't married, so there's no divorce involved. As for Heather, she had some legal problems for her attack, but not the one she really deserved. A judge said that being her first offense, it didn't warrant a severe punishment. So that's what's been happening lately. Not much, except for these events of the last few weeks. I imagine my father might want to have a relationship with me and my son now, but we've thought about it very carefully with my husband and we don't want him around. It's been a long time since we had any kind of relationship with him, and I don't want to have one now.